So welcome everyone to the first delegation of Canadians at the Second International Working Class Conference, Canadians Working in Class, and it's just a joy to have all these wonderful people come together to talk about this most taboo topic in colonized Canada. Yes, we don't talk about this in Canada. So before we get started, as per tradition in Canada, we want to acknowledge that we are all on colonized land, and some of us are settlers, and we became settlers either through choice or through forced migration or being expulsed from countries because of poverty and class. But wherever you are situated on today, to really think about what being on these lands means. And I am facilitating from the unceded Songhees, Esquimalt, and Misonich Peoples territory in Victoria, British Columbia. And what unceded means is stolen territory that treaties were never agreed upon or written. And as anybody's been paying attention into the news, there's the horrors coming out of Canada in finding unmarked graves of Indigenous children who were stolen from their homes and forced into residential schools. So as we go along today, really thinking about what this means and how it shapes our work and the conversations we have and how all of what we do plays into this. So right now, Sarah Curry is going to talk to us about space, and I'm going to turn off my PowerPoint.
Hi guys, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're coming from. You won't recognize me. I'm going to go through this really quickly. My name is Sarah. I'm an interloper in this early arena. I do a lot of speaking and facilitating in critical disability. And in the spaces that I work in, it's really important to establish what's called brave space. And you can message me directly about this if you want. But in establishing brave space, it comes with this set of conventions that some people like to call rules, but oftentimes I describe it more as a classroom ethos that I'm sure everybody wants to sustain for the body, minds, and the subject positions of everyone in the room. And we do have over 50 people in here right now. So by ethos, I mean conduct we can all agree would be appropriate for this space we're inhabiting and making sure everyone feels as safe as I do. And I think everyone wants that. So I personally like to inhabit spaces of coziness, and I hope to foster that here with you this morning or this evening or this afternoon for wherever you are. This is a Canadian panel, so I'm sure for a lot of us it's the afternoon. Having these spaces to safely facilitate the questions and critiques and investigating the ways of knowing that we do mediate in brave space is an excellent means of questioning your knowingness, your unknowingness, and discovering parts of yourself and others to hold empathy for and with. And holding that space with me and Elaine and all your panelists here means that you need to be open to considerations about experiences, lived experience, body, mind, knowledge, and alternative ways of knowing from outside the harsh empiricism of the academy. Can you believe I've memorized this? That's how many times I've said this. I promise to do that for you and hold your questions with empathy and honesty. I will be monitoring the chat to your right, or you can use the questions box down below. If you do not know how to do that, I will tell you, just message the box. I promise to do all of these things for you in what I call a cozy space ethos, but in return, I'm hoping you can reciprocate that for me and for us and for everyone here.
Okay, and thank you so much, Sarah. Sarah's graciously came in at the last minute to help me because of my vision. So I am just going to put it over to Jes and to learn about her brilliant work.
So thanks for joining us today. This is a presentation on my recently concluded thesis called An Uncomfortable City. It's a community-based investigation of hostile architecture in Calgary, Alberta. Just a little bit of background information about myself. So I'm a master's student at the University of Victoria, British Columbia, in the Department of Sociology. Born and raised in Calgary, and that's where I currently live now. My areas of research or interests are homelessness, Black feminism, Marxism, and anarchist thoughts. Outline of this presentation is as follows. I will begin with an introduction and some context information, key definitions, theoretical groundwork, the methodology. I talk a little bit about the collaborators in this project, some snapshots of hostile architecture from around Calgary, some themes, and then concluding thoughts. All right, so how I came to study hostile architecture. So I guess for me, it started out of my love for the inner city. I grew up in the inner city at a time that was very much marked by like mixed use housing, mixed income housing and zoning. But I found that as I've gone older, I don't see as much as that. There's a lot more kind of, I guess, upscale things downtown and a little bit more segregation between the haves and the have-nots. All right. And then reflecting on the literature, there is a lot of talk about the social exclusion of the poor and homeless. So in my eyes, hostile architecture is just kind of another facet of that. The setting of this research is the inner city of Calgary, Alberta. It's a city that's very much marked by oil and gas enthusiasm and somewhat conservative politics. So this is kind of shifting. It kind of depends. The significance of the study is just being able to look at class-based exclusion in a new way, examining and questioning the loss of true public spaces and common spaces, and honoring lived experience, that of my collaborators in this project. So my research questions were as follows. How do people with lived experience of homelessness understand hostile architecture? So how has it shaped their lives? How might their lived experience contribute to informing a sociological understanding of this architecture? Or how might this research make awareness of hostile architecture as a sociological issue? And lastly, how might the lived experience of my collaborators inform political hostile architecture policies? So what is hostile architecture? There are other names as well, including defensive and deterrent architecture. The definition that we sort of used to guide our research was that it's the use of space or structure to deter or kind of impede the actions of certain people in certain spaces. Examples include unsleepable benches, spikes, and fins. I do have some pictures coming up in a few slides too. The commons is the setting, the general setting of this project. So just any space that's accessible publicly and is open. And neoliberalism, I think it's kind of a term that we hear a lot of, but isn't really well defined. So I really like this quote here. It's the deepening penetration of capitalism into political and social institutions, as well as cultural consciousness itself. Neoliberalism is intensification of the influence and dominance of capital. It is elevation of capitalism as a mode of production into an ethic, a set of political imperatives, and a cultural logic. It is also a project to strengthen, restore, and in some cases, constitute anew the power of economic elites. The theoretical groundwork. So for me, it was very hard to ignore the political and theoretical underpinnings of hostile architecture, as it kind of represents the growing privatization of public spaces. So to look at this, I've borrowed the theoretical orientation of Henry Lefebvre, mainly his concept of the right to the city. But I want to begin with social space as a social construct, because it just kind of sets out the stage of why it's so important to look at these social spaces. The right to the city entails, it kind of is a good tool for helping us to critique and evaluate how equitable social spaces are in the city. The right to the city is essentially the right to fully inhabit a space. For me, it's kind of the difference between being an inhabitant, to like fully live in a space, versus being a citizen, which is kind of tied to different structures of privilege. The methodology. So I chose community-based participatory action research. I wanted a project design that would lend itself to honoring experience and also mobilizing knowledge of my collaborators. So this took the form of semi-structured interviews. I did at least 2 or 3 with most of the collaborators. There was an opening kind of icebreaker, and then a following one where we looked at pictures of hostile architecture. All texts were analyzed using interpretive phenomenological analysis. It's a mode of analysis that kind of allows to the researcher to really focus on experience first. So in order to really stay close to the data, I started with in vivo, where codes are derived directly from the words of participants, or in this case, collaborators, then line by line, summarizing each line into general sentiments, and then a final time focusing just on their experiences. So who were the collaborators? So they were 4 advocates with lived experience of homelessness in Calgary. They all in their own way have very strong radical imagination. And what this means is that they are able to see the world not how it is currently, but how it could be. And because of this, they are able to kind of use this in practice towards working towards a better, more inclusive world. So below, sorry for the big block text, but it was a quote by one of my collaborators when I asked him about what he thinks about the emphasis on lived experience in this project. And he says, so it doesn't really matter what it is. If you're looking for help fixing your brakes, you're not going to go to a doctor, you're going to go to a mechanic. So there's a big experience factor. It doesn't matter what the project is. Getting the input of individuals that it will affect and those who have been affected by the changes is key. So lived experience is key. I'll let you guys read the rest, but I just thought it was kind of a good way of saying that when you're looking for the source of an issue, you got to speak to people who are directly affected by it. So some snapshots. On this slide, I took all of these ones myself. The first one is kind of an example of your typical bench inside of the bus shelters. You often see them, they're very short, they're curved, and they have this armrest, this partition in the middle, so that no one can really lie down across them. Second one is a bus shelter as well, but not a C-train one. So you see it's slanted so that people can't really sleep on it very well. And then the other ones are all the infamous armrests that are kind of too low to use comfortably, but do in fact impede the lying down and sleeping. This was one that one of the collaborators took. It was the most talked about structure, I would say. So these are heating vents that are located on one of the C-train. And sorry, I should clarify what that is. It's a kind of like it's a light rail train that runs through the inner city. So there were heating vents there that people would use in the winter. They would lie on top of them to get warm. I think within the last decade, the city put up these metal objects in the shape of people so that real people couldn't use them for warmth. So the top image is an example of the fins, or some people call them pig ears. They're usually put on structures to also impede sitting or lying down, or most usually it's skateboarding. And then the image underneath, pyramids or spikes. This was kind of put in the alcove also on a C-train platform to stop people from kind of using that space and hiding from the elements. So this is just kind of a bit of a preliminary map that me and one of the collaborators worked on to kind of track the dispersion of hostile architecture and also have a way of showing it to the public. There is a link that I will share at the end. All right, so a couple of key themes. There were a lot that came out of this, but the one I want to focus on today is what I like to call the wider grid wall of hostilities against the homeless. So I kind of set out to look at whether or not urban furniture was amendable to people who really needed it. And while doing that, I kind of stumbled across a broader, uncomfortable city, kind of upheld by different hostile actions towards the homeless. So I found that speaking to collaborators, it was impossible to just focus on, say, uncomfortable benches. Everybody spoke of things ranging from police harassment to being ticketed for panhandling, zoning practices. All of these kind of are assembled together and kind of uphold social exclusion of the poor and homeless. All right, so in conclusion, I just kind of want to leave everybody off maybe encouraging you to question the spaces in your urban area that you might take for granted, kind of evaluate how amendable they are to people in need. But here I do also want to state that it's not my aim to have people just sleeping outside on urban furniture. It's just the fact that there are people who currently do need these spaces. So I think that it's just best if we allow people to live in dignity and not shut them out of society. All right. Some contact information. So I have a zine. I've only put one out. I'm going to put another one out in the fall. I use it to sort of mobilize knowledge, and I will be putting information about this project in there as well. But there were amazing contributors to that as well. My email and the map that I worked on with one of the collaborators. I can also put that into the chat as well. Thank you.
That was phenomenal, Jes. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And if you have Q&A questions, we're going to be doing that in a couple presentations from now. So Elaine, did you say who was after Jes? Tina?
Sarah Potts, you're up next. Why?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
We got you.
Okay, I might take off this weird background. Okay, great. I wish that I had a slideshow too. So you're just going to kind of hear me kind of speaking and go on a bit about why our stories matter. And to be honest, I'm a bit mad, but I don't want to come off as disheartening, because I know that what we're capable of, and I know even though things need to be reimagined, this is all within the realm of possibility. And it's really important for me to start off today by framing my experience as a white woman, and to be clear of the inherent privilege that brings in comparison to those whose poverty intersects with indigeneity, race, different gender expressions, ability or sexual identity, and age or access to housing. And I remain hyper aware of the way that we speak for others and what that all means when it rolls out to policy, practice, and action. So I wanted to talk today about why our stories matter. I wanted to begin to speak about why our stories matter. This is something that we've had a few different iterations of this conversation with at a few different opportunities with Elaine, and I've really kind of changed my thinking around that. It's the importance of our stories is something that I've focused my career on. It's a truth that over the last few years I've learned a lot about and kind of reframed. Lately, I've been thinking about how much we're often expected to lose to institutions that are unwilling to actually change, and the exceptional risks that we take for incremental change, and the personal cost in the risks and the knowledge that and the ways of knowing that we ultimately lose through assimilation in order to survive. And if in these environments, can our stories really matter? So really just thinking that is inclusion and a push for diversity within that, it means nothing if the institutions don't fundamentally want to change. So I'm joining you today from Lekwungen territories, home of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. I'm an uninvited settler on this land, and I'm of Irish, Scottish, and English descent. I'm a queer single parent who at 18th birthed my daughter into generational poverty. A new discovery this year of poverty passed down and the criminalization of poverty. My great-great-grandmother raised my great-grandfather in a workhouse in England. I'm a graduate of the University of Victoria. I studied political science and human dimensions of climate change. I'm a first-term city councillor in the City of Victoria. Through a career of political organizing and community organizing and working with marginalized communities, I've believed in the importance of centering lived experience and the policies that shape all of our lives. As a city councillor, I've remained dedicated to centering the voices in all of my work and developing policies that are inclusive of our community. And some of the conversation on hostile architecture really brings true to some of the work that I think is really important in some of the conversations we've been having in Victoria regarding homelessness. But I do remain challenged in the way that institutions in the status quo who will use lived experience to benefit their aims, but how they're unwilling to change and to actually address the inequality that they are perpetuating. And I feel challenged by my complicity in that by being part of an institution such as a government. I was supported as running in as an equity-seeking candidate, both as a queer woman and somebody who understands poverty. Certainly nothing has defined my experience as much as growing up in poverty has. And every time I speak about this, I get a little bit more unforgiving on my position. So beginning from the question that Elaine wrote, from Elaine Laberge's research, asking what can we do to widen participation for poverty class students without assimilation and in non-deficit ways, I want to talk about why our stories matter. And I always talk about Linda Stout because I love her so much. And if you haven't read any of her work, she's really good. It's a really good place to start. She's a self-taught activist and one of my favorite writers and speakers and agents of change. She started the PPP, or the Piedmont Peace Project. It's one of the most successful grassroots organizations around folks around poverty in the States. And she really worked on empowering people who have never had a voice in policy decisions. And she argues that social change movements have largely been middle-class initiatives, that poor people must be the ones to speak up and lead if we're going to make real progress in economic and social change. And I completely agree. In her book, Bridging the Gap, the first chapter, Growing Up Poor, she shares her own personal story about in order to help the reader understand how poverty in North America and attitudes toward the poor disempower and oppress them. So it was really reaffirming to read this, because I've never actually seen my same experience in school shared before. This is kind of I think a lot of people could relate to kind of feeling where all your faults are on display, from your clothes to whether or not you'd be going on a school trip, or your lunch wrapped in milk bags, which maybe is only a context that kids from Ontario would understand. And then later in high school, were still the days where we just didn't eat at all. So Linda talks a lot about what it looks like as a student to overcome the messages you receive as a child of poverty, messages that you're somehow deficient and that your voice didn't belong. She speaks about the way that those in poverty class have to become culturally bilingual to survive. I wasn't ever out in school. I was trying to pass. And she reminds us that passing for middle class in some cases is a matter of survival. But when we are silent, we feed the forces that individualize our class struggle. And without naming the class systems and institutions that fail us, they go unnamed and unchallenged. And I think there's some interesting research that is raised by the Wolfgang Lenman. He's at Western University in Ontario. He followed a cohort of students from low-income backgrounds through university, and he found that the fourth-year students that did well were on a trajectory to the middle class, and they were essentially dual citizens and stateless at the same time, he says. They no longer fit in where they used to be, but they were outsiders in the new world too. Disappointingly, he writes that rather than finishing university with a deeper understanding of the structural and cultural conditions of their former low-income working class lives, the students have working class knowledge and experience deficient, if not pathological. That the students have joined the middle class chorus that renders the working class knowledge and experience deficient, if not pathological. This brings me back to why I'm really excited glad to be part of this discussion today, because I think it's really important not to write out that experience and that specialized knowledge that we really do bring, that is quite important to solving the challenges of our time. But I'm also coming to learn there's so much that I will not lose for an institution to check a few marks, or that also, to support the idea that glossy inclusion and diversity campaigns or programs can be seen as adequate. I always like to bring in Vivian Adair in her work, The Missing Stories of Ourselves, Poor Women, Power and Politics. She says stories from the margins are crucial as they critically test the prejudices that underwrite the narrative norms and that are perpetuated by powerful knowledge-producing institutions. Our stories are complex, first-person views of what poverty and resistance look like from the inside out. And we have to be clear that we need to be part of this conversation, but it needs to be more than talk. We need to be clear what's at stake when we perpetuate the system and continue to see individual successes in those pulling up your bootstraps sort of stories, and that capitalist hero story as the goal. We need to be clear that the losses society faces when we continue to allow assimilation and the erosion of the poverty class knowledge and voices, and what we all risk when we invite the other to the table when we don't really need it. For many years, I clung to the iconic words of a very iconic woman who I deeply respect and deeply admire. And I say all of this with the greatest degree of respect and reverence for everything that she is and everything that she embodies. Incredible politician, Shirley Chisholm. And she says, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And I say that a lot. I used it in a lot of speeches, but lately I've been deeply frustrated by the conditions that make these words seem like the best opportunity. It's a pull yourself up by the root story, capitalism, the kind of story capitalism loves. And it is problematic because it assumes even if the system is flawed, it remains unchanged. You must be the one to overcome it. Now lauded by the system as its success, all of Shirley's work came at a heavy price. She received multiple threats against her life, assassination attempts, and even she had to sue to be included in televised debates and didn't even receive the full support of her own party. And this continues. This year in Canada, we've seen a saddening, actually a devastating amount of women in Canadian politics, and candidates not of the status quo, representing the change we so desperately needed, seen in a great sweep in 2018 of new voices being driven for office or being say that they were not going to be running again. And Jessica McCallum Miller, she's Gitxsan, Wet'suwet'en, and Niska of descent, became one of Terra Species' youngest electeds and the first Indigenous councillor in 2018. She stepped down in 2020 of February, saying that systemic and internalized racism, as well as sexism, played a role in her her colleagues' inability to respect and understand her personal and diverse perspectives. She could no longer endure the mental and spiritual hardships of explaining this and ultimately being unsupported by those she worked with. She expressed concern about. Now, this is something that it's not even questionable. There is tons of evidence around this, but she expressed concern about how industrial growth in the region could negatively impact Indigenous women, and was immediately attacked by the others on council. And she was bringing forward something that hadn't been said on council, but previously, but not that it wasn't true. This is something that has been reported in the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, released in 2019, a whole chapter on resource extraction projects and their connection to violence against women, the boom towns, and work camps. There's substantial evidence of the correlation between resource extraction and violence against Indigenous women and girls. She shared her own experience of being harassed by unknown men in terrace and expressed concerns about the issues of domestic and sexual violence not being addressed. For this, a fellow councillor, James Cordero, made a formal complaint against her, and the rest of council supported this. And unfortunately, she, amid all this, she stepped down and we lost that voice. And it pains me to see that the institution was so unwilling to change despite all the evidence, or so unwilling to look at what inclusion really looks like, and including diverse voices, that she was just ousted from the entire process. it just goes back to show that our stories do really matter. But often status quo advice works really well for white men or women of privilege will not work the same way for non-white men or not men. Get involved and talk louder and speak your mind are examples of behavior that work well when you have a lot of privilege but carry extreme risks, and increasingly so, particularly in political arenas, when you don't. I've been threatened. I've been harassed. I've been made to feel afraid. I no longer post pictures of my family online for advocating for unhoused people, for social equality, for programs that make our community better. For me, it's coming to an understanding that getting good at politics means perpetuating a system that I'm working so hard to actually upend. Similarly, we know that education breaks the cycle of generational poverty, but in order for this to be revolutionary, we desperately need our institutions to change. From my experience as an elected official entrenched within a powerful institution, it's clear that inviting people to the table isn't enough. As we sit at the feet of giants on rickety lawn chairs, our voices silenced or dimmed or assimilated, our lives literally threatened for voicing the experience of many outside of privilege, for daring to ask for equality, for literally for asking for equality, for fairness, or for true inclusion. It's clear again to see that this simply isn't enough. Institutions must be the ones to change, and it must not be through the inclusion of one or two or people at the table. It's a new table, a table that's truly informed by lived experience and a willingness to change. And how we get there is a really, really good question. And I know many are exploring. I thank you for letting me share a little bit about my thinking on this and its importance today, and the importance of thinking about how we do support those who are heading into these big institutions to share their most valuable voices, and what a future could look like that where these voices are supported, encouraged, and respected. Thank you.
That was really wonderful, Sarah, and I thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to queue up Miss Charity when you're ready.
I want to say thank you, Sarah. You're my shiro, and now my dearest sister friend, Charity, who I haven't seen in a few years because of COVID, and I'll see next week. And she's here, and I'm so grateful. Charity, over to you.
Sarah. Wow, that was phenomenal, so articulate. I really like the way it's somewhat teed up of why our stories matter, and you expressed it so beautifully. And then I'm doing a very, very, very different presentation this time. Oh, and Jes, thank you so much for your presentation. It was super eye-opening. Just amazing work, everyone. My presentation, I'll just be very, very open, honest here. I'm grieving a very significant loss, and normally I would have a PowerPoint slide. I would be a little bit more academic, a lot less personal, but I'm doing something very different today. I scribbled in a notebook, and I'm just going to share a little bit of my story and things that I've noticed and observed. I hope that's okay. It's not going to be very academic, but it is going to be something that I've never really done before, especially publicly. So bear with me. And thank you so much also, Sarah, for facilitating this space. And Elaine, I love you to pieces, and thank you for all the things. So just to share a bit of my story, a little bit where I currently am and where I've come from. So I work as the Community Connect program lead and professional development coordinator over at the University of Alberta for the Faculty of Graduate Studies and Research. How's that for a mouthful? I'm very privileged. I understand my place of privilege. and I'm privileged to be employed, so very grateful. I do, however, it's been a little bit of a slow, muddy climb to get there. And I do work as an administrator, so I'm taking a bit of that lens of how I see a community, how there's a community of caring within a community of conflict. And a lot of it is kind of centered around hierarchies. And obviously, coming from poverty myself, didn't always live in poverty my entire life, but it definitely shaped me as a young child. The only reason we were able to get out of it is because my grandmother came to live with us and moved us out of poverty, and she became essentially my mother. So I always used to joke, though, although we lived in this new neighborhood, my last name being Slowbod, my brother and I were like, you could take the Slowbods out of Abbotsfield, which was is a very, very tough neighborhood, especially in the 80s and the 90s. But you can't take the Abbotsfield out of the Slowbods. We always kind of didn't quite fit in. We were the only like home in this, 2.5 or, 2.5 child, nuclear family. Very also, I came from a lot of 85% of my school were Indigenous students, and then I go to this very white, like, strange place outside of the city. So I was also abused. So I was called stupid my whole life by my father, everybody. I had so much shame and anxiety and nervousness that people used to call me stupid in school because I didn't know how to talk to people. I barely graduated from high school. I've always worked several jobs, numerous jobs, always. Even still today. And I kind of feel like my experiences with poverty stripped a path, a bit of a clear path of what to do. You just basically had to work to survive. So there wasn't a sense of self very early on. Okay, now let's kick it up to where we are now in academia. That is food for fodder in academia. I somehow started reading, I challenged, anyway, I'm not gonna bore you with the story of how I ended up in my role, but it was a slow and steady climb of bit by bit gaining more confidence. However, constantly still being slammed down in the community of conflict. So I landed in a role, I lifeguarded at the university, and then I dislocated my shoulder, and they needed a new receptionist. So I landed in a role where I was the receptionist for the dean of kinesiology, and I was surrounded by these academics that intimidated me. Still that inner voice of being stupid, and but bit by bit, I realized that the only difference is that they had the confidence and the decisiveness to kind of go to grad school. And I did finish my undergrad at that time. I ended up doing my master's, and I didn't feel right about doing my PhD. There was something within the inherent structure. I didn't know what it was at the time, but my intuition felt like it was really competitive. It felt lonely, self-serving, and there was just something that I stopped there. I did work, because again, several jobs. I worked, still lifeguarded, still TA'd, and I worked in outreach. So I helped organize graduate students to go out and communicate to the community. As soon as I graduated, I jumped at a chance to work with the person that I currently work with, my director, as her assistant. Okay.
Whoops, Charity, we've lost you. Hang on. Can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Charity, please unmute your microphone.
Something.
Have I been muted this whole time?
No, girl, you're good. Just the last 2 seconds.
Could you imagine? I'm like, Especially the story that I'm telling. Oh my gosh, that would be horrifying. Everybody can still hear me then. Okay.
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And please, please let me know how I'm doing for time, because I'm in my own head right now and I don't want to eat up anybody else's time. Okay. So I moved on to be an assistant. I have since created my own program, my own partnerships. I have a lot more confidence today, like to do this presentation. It's I couldn't have done it even 3 years ago. So things that I did notice though, in my time I'm currently as an administrator, just talking a bit about the culture there. I had seen assistants being treated horribly by the people that they're assisting. One told me that she never would tell her husband about how abused she is because she didn't want him to get involved and for him to get mad. When I was working for the dean of kinesiology, I was eating an apple and I had this apple on my desk and he walked past and I already ate most of this apple and he walked past and he grabbed my apple and took a bite out of it and put it back on the desk. And I was like, I could just make a joke about it. I was like, that was whimsical. But if anybody has seen like There Will Be Blood, it's like, I drink your milkshake. Just weird behavior of just that kind of. I was on alumni council and I was invited to give a speech over a convocation. I was in an abusive relationship at the time, and my partner, anyway, I had a horrible night with him, and I basically had no adrenaline left and was just deflated. And I tried to find a familiar, encouraging face behind, where everybody's getting roped up. And the person that I'm actually quite close to totally ignored me because they were in their scene and they didn't want to introduce me. So I just sat on a chair by myself drinking tea. And I just saw the clickiness, the hierarchy. I run my own programs, but sometimes in hierarchical situations, I'm still introduced as this person's assistant. That it's been years since I've been the assistant. But I see it all as insecurity of others and they want to push you down because it props them up. Really, though, I beg to differ. I think propping other people up should push you up. So I just want to end with this, try to practice care with no established hierarchy, which is really difficult to do in the institution that we belong to that is based on hierarchical systems. So, yeah, thank you for letting me share just a haphazard everywhere story, but hopefully it kind of ties together with everything else that, in some way that Jes and Sarah and Tina have all shared and Tina will be sharing. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Charity. You're always just inspiring and brilliant, and everything threads together, and it's amazing. And I'm going to introduce you to Tina Marie, who is this beautiful librarian I met at UVic. And for the Shoestring Initiative, I have a campaign, Magic Happens When You Learn with a Librarian, and which is free for anybody in the world to use. And so I'm just going to hand it over to you, Tina Marie.
All right, just get my timer going here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Sarah. That was moving for me. My name is Tina Bevington. I'm the history librarian at the University of Victoria, beautiful British Columbia, Canada. And in that role, I support a lot of students at every level, mainly first-year students, first and second-year students who are just figuring stuff out. Lots of noobs. And I do not teach for credit courses or assign grades. So I'm more often in the role of mentor, tutor, friend, not like I'm outside of that strict hierarchy of the woman that assigns my grades, if that makes sense. So what I want to do today is tell you about my origin story, how I got here, and then how that impacts how I relate to my students, and then especially how I've started to see my students differently in light of COVID and the lockdowns that we've had in Canada. And then I'll try to put that together to propose a new philosophy of service, and situate that in my own institutional context. So I must disclaim here that my background is humanities. I'm not a sociologist. I lack the language and the philosophy that many of you have to explain these concepts. So what I say here today may not be new to you, but this is my epiphany based primarily on two things. Two things that have intersected for me recently that really started to impact my thinking. The first is having the privilege to associate with Elaine and the Shoestring Project and the great work that they do. Knowing that other Canadian academics think about these issues has been a light bulb moment for me and really brought on just a flood of introspection and reflection for me personally. And the second catalyst for this epiphany is, going through the lockdown for COVID and experiencing that for myself, but also seeing my students experience that and what they go through. So, that was a crash course in the digital divide and how that is still a very real thing, as well as other forms of economic inequality. This is still very real in my country. Canada has quite a lot of social supports, quite a lot of support for students financially, but it's obviously never enough. So this will be very much my personal journey, my personal reflections. There's no citations in this paper at all, because this is all from my poor brain. And I do not speak for my university here. This is all me. So I grew up very working class. I was a base brat, that is military dependent. And this meant that my entire life, up until university, was moving between cities and provinces. I attended 20 schools before university, often moving mid-year. And in Canada, our educational system is divided provincially. So moving between provinces mean that you're leaving one entire curriculum into another. So often I learned the same thing over and over again, or I missed learning important things, like learning how to write cursive or math concepts, because I was moving so frequently at such long distances. This impacted my education quite a bit, obviously, but I was a smart kid and I could catch myself up usually. But it parallels the experiences of children living in poverty who move between households, even in the same city, perhaps. We know that this impacts your education quite a lot, but also your socialization and all of your sort of adulting life skills. Teachers did not take the time to get to know me because they knew that I was moving on. There were no base schools in the 80s for military kids. So we went to civilian schools. We lived in civilian neighborhoods where our experience was not the norm. Most kids knew each other since kindergarten. I was always the new kid, always the new girl. And it sucked, frankly. It sucked a lot. But base brats have a particular reputation, at least in Canada, of being very troublesome kids, of having, legal troubles. I was destined for drug abuse and teen pregnancy, if you asked any of these teachers. By about grade 7, I had adopted a really tough punk exterior because the teachers were never going to give me a shot anyway. So I was pulling straight A's, but also very invested in my own badassery. And, I fronted a lot of attitude to give these teachers a reason to hate me, since they would anyway. So I fought hard against those stereotypes and against the economic realities in my family. I really wanted to attend university. I had to tell off well-intentioned but totally clueless guidance counselors who kept trying to steer me into a career in childcare. I had to demand the forms of information to apply to schools. I had to fight to take the university-bound classes that I knew I needed, so that, that I could apply. I was getting straight A's, except in phys ed, and constantly pushing against a system that still didn't think I could be anything. So I did it, and it worked. I got into the school of my choice. And my parents, my father in particular, had always told his girls that education is the only way out of poverty. He deeply regretted not being able to go to school. He joined the military instead because school was completely out of reach for his family. But I internalized the hell out of this. I knew from the age of 3 that going to school was the only way out of poverty, the only way to make sure you got to eat every day, the only thing that would allow you to not live under the boot of employers or service work or whatever else. I wanted to go to school to learn everything, to know everything, and to have a fabulous job where I'd be in charge of lots of other people. That was my childhood dream, and my parents tried to push me into law because I'd argue this with them as a small child. I soon learned that I had internalized it wrong. I got it so wrong, even though this is what they wanted me to learn. I didn't learn it in the way that they wanted me to learn it. The first time I was really aware consciously of class difference is when I came home for the first Christmas in first year university. I was so excited to be home after my first semester. Immediately, I was attacked by my entire family for my choice of major. I was studying philosophy, and they really wanted me to study something that would lead to a job. They just didn't get it. They don't know any philosophers. They don't know what philosophers do. And they sure didn't understand how that could be a job someday. So this led to so many fights. My sister was our first family member to go to university, and she studied accounting. And this they understood. You study accounting, you become an accountant, you get a paycheck. This is all they wanted from me. My self-indulgent choice of major was incomprehensible to everyone I knew at home. And I soon found myself just shutting up about it because they didn't understand. They weren't going to get it. They didn't care that I was super excited about all this learning. But they would still bring it up at the dinner table. Why don't you study something job ready? Why can't I learn useful skills? They're not paying me to philosophize, damn it. They want me to get a job. So I continued to try to explain that humanities prepares one for life and teaches you how to communicate and learn and lead. And I was excelling. I was, again, pulling straight A's. I was so happy in this environment. It all fell on deaf ears. They wouldn't pay for me to be a waitress when I grew up, so I started working several jobs a day, several jobs to pay for school, housing, books, everything else. So in addition to the financial pressure, there's epic time pressure, very little leisure time. And between school and work, I had very little time for sleep, much less reflection. And all students are poor in Canada to a degree, or at least on a budget. So I didn't feel that different from my classmates. And I was learning to fit in an academic sense, in that I was getting good grades and excelling at school. What I really did lose out on, though, growing up in poverty as a military dependent, was the skill of forming relationships. Military family life is all about leaving. You carry as little as possible with you. You pack it all up and you move on and you burn all your bridges as you go. There's no pen pals afterwards. There's no writing your best friends, at least in my family. We never made any attempt to stay in touch with any of the previous home's people or places or things. So there was never a thought to keeping in touch or maintaining these relationships. So friendships were fast and done. That was my whole experience of both friendships, but also mentorships, teacher-student relationships, everything. Unfortunately, post-secondary success, at least here, requires building and maintaining relationships all kinds of relationships, but largely with your professors. You need reference letters, research opportunities, publishing opportunities. You need appropriate contacts to introduce you to other people at other institutions in your discipline. I had no idea this is how university was played. And I really hosed myself, to use a Canadian term. Come third year, when I was seeking academic jobs on campus, I didn't have the contacts to find a TA-ship or a RA-ship. Was worse still when I was trying to apply to graduate school and needed reference letters. Despite studying, working, and volunteering on campus for 4 years, despite putting together events and running conferences for the philosophy department, no one felt they knew me well enough to provide a reference. This was a huge problem. This was a huge gap in my understanding of how university worked and my own enculturation. This was far and away the most important thing I did not know. And I did not realize it until it was much too late to really fix it. Establishing and maintaining contacts was something I never heard of growing up, and absolutely not part of our lives growing up. I was expected to pick this up through osmosis, and I did not get the memo. So I really want my students to know this and understand this, because this is still very much true in academia. Furthermore, I never understood the social aspect of going to university. I went to Trent. I see there's Trent people here. We had sherry parties with professors, and I had no idea what those were for. Those were for building and maintaining those social contacts. I did not know that. When I went to grad school, my parents, I thought they would appreciate the fact that I was going to a professional program into librarianship, and I thought that they would get this and they would be super excited for me, and finally a career path. But no, they did not understand this at all. They knew librarians as the people who sit at the desk and check out their books when they go to the public library. They didn't know that behind the scenes, there's an army of librarians running that library. There's all different kinds of librarians in all different contexts. My dad later admitted that he thought there was maybe one librarian in Canada sitting in Ottawa somewhere. And she's probably 70 years old, strolling the halls of the National Library. He didn't realize that there were jobs, lots of jobs out there in every possible context for information professionals. So again, I let them down. Again, I was putting on airs and, acting smarter than everybody. So, moving on, I did get jobs. I am currently gainfully employed. This has worked out for me incredibly well. But, I'm still straddling those two worlds. I still don't fit in. So what does this have to do with my students and the institution that serves them? In Canada today, there's lots of competition for students. Students can apply to different levels of colleges, university colleges, trade programs. They don't have to go to university. University is still very, very expensive. It takes longer than other educational programs. We are competing for students with all these other places. So we pour a lot of resources now into retention programs. So these could be tutor programs, all sorts of things that, designed to be interventions for students when they arrive, if they're struggling, that they don't flunk out after Christmas of their first year. So I see students like me every day, and I don't ask them where they come from. So this is pure speculation on my part, but I believe that certain familiar patterns of behavior, they resonate with me. And I believe that those students that I see these patterns of behavior in are coming from poverty or working class backgrounds. They're likely to be first generation students, just based on their behavior and their approach to, how to do university. I want to talk about entitlement real quick. Some students come into campus full of entitlement. And we know that, there's a negative connotation there, but I'm really trying to use the word in the most neutral sense. Some students come in ready to take advantage of every single service on campus. They attend every workshop. They go to every single program. They ask us lots of questions. They use every single resource they can to get ahead. They're fully present. They make noise. They ask questions. They sit up in the front row and they are there. You know that they're there. They never apologize for doing so or taking up that space. And they have the freedom often to study what they love, and they're very passionate about it. Compare that to many other students who come in exhibiting anxiety. They apologize for asking questions. They have to be cajoled into attending workshops or tutor sessions. They sit in the back. They take up very little space. They do not make noise. They do not ask questions. These students slip out of the back of the room rather than, approaching me one-on-one after a workshop. They suffer from a lack of entitlement. They're paying for all of these services, but they're not taking advantage of them because they don't feel entitled to them. This is a huge problem for those students. They're often under enormous pressure to study a professional discipline, which may not match their passions, and you can tell. So first thing I do every day at my job is encourage everyone to use all the services, to ask all the questions, to milk everything they can out of their outrageous tuition, to take every benefit to help themselves improve their skills, improve their grades, all of it. I will walk a student into a workshop because I'm pushy that way. I will make sure that that there's a workshop available, all of that. So I'm a big cheerleader for these students. No matter what the cause is, I want to reduce their library anxiety. I want to make them better students. I want them to fully embrace their university experience and know that they belong here. They may not want to fight for that. I will fight for that for them. I want them to really believe that they belong in university. I also take great pains when I'm doing orientations or showing students around to let them know that the services we offer are free in the sense that they've already paid for it, right? There's no out-of-pocket additional costs to take advantage of interlibrary loan services or document delivery or all the other things that we offer. The only thing we make students pay for is printing. And we do that at a cost recovery level. We don't make any money off of that. So we do charge non-members for these same services. So it's not a ridiculous assumption when a student comes in to think they're going to have to pay for all this fabulous stuff. And if a student is coming from another country that doesn't have a public library system, they may have no experience with free information whatsoever. So I always take pains to do that, just to really be explicit about what is free to students. I also remind them that they can dispute library fines. They can argue any fees with us, because if they take the time to do that, if they act entitled, we will respond to that. If they don't push us, we won't, and they'll be stuck paying fines or other fees. So this is huge, and my colleagues make fun of me for saying, "Oh, always ask, always ask." This is my catchphrase, and I'm known for it around my library, because even if there's no solution, we can propose an alternative, something for you. Librarians will like to say no. We will say no, but there's another thing, or here's another solution, or maybe try this. We're not no people in general. So this is really important to me, that students are sort of taken out of their comfort zone. That's where learning happens, but also they need to take advantage of all the opportunities. So publishing opportunities, work study jobs, going to events, all sorts of things that we need to be really explicit to students that these things are here for them. They need to take advantage of them. They're empowered and entitled to do so. And I will be really explicit about saying, this will look great on your resume, or this will lead to other opportunities. Like I want them to know that this is mercenary. They're doing this for a purpose. This is their career. So again, that really explicit stuff is really important. We have a lot of students living in poverty. There's a housing crisis in my community. Our campus runs a food bank and a free store. Our local churches provide free meals. We know that our students are living in poverty. So when COVID hit, we really saw this when I was seeing through the screens into students' homes, living in very poor student housing with no furniture, sharing spaces with way too many people. Students lacked often the technology that we require. to, you know, to go to school, especially to go to school online by distance. They didn't have, you know, current laptops. They didn't have licensed software. They didn't have printers at home. They lacked so many things that we take for granted. So this taught me that the digital divide is still very real. Our libraries are not doing enough to address it. We provide a lot of spaces and technology to students, but they, you know, none of that reached into students' homes during the COVID lockdown. We were locked down for like 18 months or something. It was crazy ridiculous. So other students, especially those living up north in Canada, may not have reliable electricity or Wi-Fi. So really, I saw the students in these situations really struggling to go to class and do their homework and make it work, which really hit home for me in a really significant way. So, you know, everything I thought I knew about students was heightened by, you know, by the COVID experience. Ordinarily, we take great pride in providing lots and lots of spaces for students to address their sort of lack of adequate housing, but we couldn't do that in COVID. So, you know, that broke my heart, frankly. Many students didn't want to turn their screens on because they didn't want us to see their homes or experience their family life and the chaos that they live in every day. So this was really a struggle. This made me a firm believer in open textbooks because textbooks cost unbelievable amounts here, and this was terrible. So yeah, so now we're planning to reopen in September, and I want to make sure we don't lose this, you know, this understanding, this empathy for our students. As we reopen, things get back to normal. We need to remember that for many, many students, their living situations are not adequate. They're not normal. So this is where I get weird. I apologize. I'll wrap up very soon, but I just want to get to my weirdness. In my head right now is a big mashup of universal design for spaces and universal design for learning. These philosophies attempt to remove the barriers that block people from accessing spaces or education to the benefit of everyone. So if you just design a course or design a library that removes physical and educational barriers right off the bat, the people who suffer most from those barriers don't need to step up and come forward and self-identify and say, hey, you know, I need a wheelchair ramp. Hello. It's just there, right? It's there for everyone. And that benefits everyone, people with strollers, everyone. So why can't we design institutions that do the same thing to address poverty? Why can't we reduce barriers for everyone that also support our first generation students and their enculturation into academic culture? I don't know what that would look like. I'm not there yet, but this is, if any sociologists know that there's already a word for this, let me know. But this is sort of what I'm thinking about right now. I believe this would involve lots of one-on-one relationships at every level, lots of institutional supports, and then most importantly, let's be really explicit about adopting the practice. Like, let's adopt a practice of being really explicit about the hidden learning we do in universities. Don't make students figure out on their own that they need to build relationships to get reference letters 4 years from now. Let's be really explicit about that. So I've started working some of this stuff into my teaching. For example, when I'm teaching about academic integrity, I go off on a little side note about disciplinary cultures and communities of scholarship and why that's important and how citation conventions relate to that. And my first year students don't really understand why, like they're not there yet. But you know, a year or two, they start to put it together and it's important. So let's all start bolstering our mentorship game when we encounter students who don't quite fit in or don't act out those entitlements. It's really important that we do that. But let's also be really explicit about telling all of our students about why we behave the way we do, why culture is the way it is in academia, and what our expectations are for their learning, but also their socialization and their enculturation into academic life. This will give all students a fair chance in academia and will help us maybe change that academic culture to be more inclusive and more welcoming to everyone. In the meantime, it will at least expose that culture to critiques and help all the students who are trying to find their way inside of it. I hope that made sense, but that's my brain right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tina Marie. Thank God I'm doing a mind mapping thing, or I would have been manically typing in the chat room. Yeah, wait till my research is presented in September. So where are we at with time, Sarah? So that, Bud, and how much time do you need so we can move on to Q&A and then make sure you have enough time for your found poem?
I'm pretty close. I've been working right along, so I'm.
So 10 minutes, would 10 minutes suffice, or do you need more?
No, even 5 minutes for me, but I want to give, of course, people a chance to do Q&As.
Okay, so if we do, help me, Sarah, I'm trying to do the math. We've got how many minutes?
4 questions and about 5 minutes, so we could probably get through 2 questions in 5 minutes.
Okay, so we've got how much time left? Because we finish at 10:50 my time, so we've got 20 minutes left.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go 10 Q&A and 10 for Bud, and then a minute for me at the end. How does that work?
Sounds good.
Okay, so I'll let you handle the Q&A because I'm still making mind mapping stuff.
No worries. Thank you to all our wonderful presenters for realizing some brave space and cozy space with us. And I'd also like to thank our Canada gang and our Canada honorary gang, if you're pretending to be Canadian right now, welcoming you here. Love that you're here. And we've got 4 questions that I will literally go in order of submission because we didn't get a lot of votes on which ones should be prioritized. So, Paul Grace asks the wonderful Jess, if Jess is still here. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi there.
I'm from a post-industrial town in northwest England. Your presentation alerted me to the extent that when I'm in the center of town, almost every human interaction is deterred by the nature of the spaces created there. Can your theory be extended from the experience of homelessness to the experience that is not economically productive, as though all sites of neoliberalism are sites of deterrence for every truly human activity? I realize that's a dissertation level question. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's definitely threads that connect it. It's not just a matter of how spaces might be equitable to people experiencing homelessness. I think this theory kind of applies to all of us and how we are allowed to use space and occupy those spaces. One supervisor actually brought up a good point that there are kind of threads that link it to something called McDonaldization, where spaces are made uncomfortable to move us through, right? You're paying, we're turning us through. So in so many facets of our life, for sure, this neoliberal creep into space, yes, yeah, it definitely deters us at every corner. That's a really great question. I hope I interpreted it properly.
You did a fabulous job answering that in under 20 seconds using David Forbes. Big respect for that. Question comes from Anonymous. That's okay. I'll say it's from me. I'll take the credit. There it is. I come from a rough sleeping background a long time ago. Okay, you know what? Me too. I have seen the kind of hostile architecture creep in and destroy any place of comfort which I knew. Is this discussion of hostile architecture understood and spoken about beyond your work? So they're asking about the body of work you drew on. 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I would say, to my knowledge, going through the literature, and I have been for a bit, there isn't really any study that decidedly looks at hostile architecture from a lived experience lens. I've seen it talked about kind of in a way that it's hostile, it's rude, it's mean, but not really using the voice or honoring the voice of people who've actually experienced it. So I was hoping to kind of be one of the first to do that and continue the conversation, encourage others who are doing research to pick it up and do the same.
We love that. We love that. Thank you. Big claps or big snaps for Ms. Jessica. Dr. Annan, I believe she said. So that's
No,
really...
no, MA student.
Just kidding. But you know what? You
One day, pipe dreams.
Okay? You'll see her again 4 years from now as
Oh.
Dr. Annan. Wait, Charity, could we get you up here for a second?
Yes, hello.
Miss Charity, first, I love your brave space utilization of non-academic modes of conduct. That was brilliant. We love it all day. Every time we don't do a PowerPoint, they call it no slides, just vibes. And I love that. You brought a question for Charity from Alex Dunedin. Thank you for sharing your experiences and observations. Very valuable sociological insights. I would be interested to know if you think that institutions and policy-based spaces create dehumanizing behaviors in people. Kind of a sociological question for you. You have 2 minutes.
Right. Sarah, I'm eating up my 2 minutes, but you're doing a fantastic job. You're just so animated. It's great. Thank you. Okay, so I would actually like to invite some sister friends to help answer this question, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. It does create a dehumanizing sort of environment. We're trying to break down these policies of equity, diversity, and inclusion that exist. It's in the works. We're pushing pillars. So yes, and we're working in the background to kind of change these very foundational structures that are so problematic, that do create these inequitable spaces. Thank you. If that kind of answered.
I thought that was a brilliant answer. Was there someone specifically you wanted to tap to help you answer that question?
I would love Elaine to say something if she's there. And Bud is also waving.
Up here. Stop mind mapping.
Yeah, I'm here. I just have to change my background. So, well, I'm not going to play nice around about this, because I just say that EDI is, it's just all siloed and it's not real, and it actually is causing more harm and damage. And EDI in Canada excludes social class, and thus poverty discrimination continues. And as long as class is excluded, all EDI talk, it just reinforces what already exists. So I love that Charity said about pushing pillars, because my research, my community-based research, which Bud is a co-supervisor, is literally pushing privilege pillars in Canadian universities, and we are centering class, and it is absolutely critical. And you know, everybody has raised this today. What happens when you ignore class and you exclude and subjugate and misuse and silence people from poverty? But I also am very grateful to be really thinking about, why should we be the ones beating the drum in places that don't want us? There's a lot of that's come out of the work. So sorry for going on so long, but you know how I get about this topic.
No, we love that space, but I'm going to shake the bracelet of truth to bring it back over to my side. I have one more question, and it is back to Jessica, which I think she anticipated because she's a future doctor. 2 parts. As the hostile architecture has increased, have the social policies addressed homelessness in the city? And how has this affected policing in the city? Oh boy, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so 2 parts to that. So definitely there has been an increase. There is something also called CPTED, so it's crime prevention technology, control the environment. So I'd say that you definitely see a lot of that. It's actually the headquarters of CPTED is in Calgary, so it's a big part of just the way they design the urban spaces, public urban spaces. And with this increase, I think that social policies are kind of reflecting it. I've heard that there's been many cuts within the last 4 to 6 years under the UCP government. So I think in a way, I don't want to say the city's becoming more hostile, because obviously it's not my experience, but with the cuts to policy, cuts to funding, as well as the increase in like hostile spaces, it's not a very good looking picture. In terms of the policing, I would say I have 3 collaborators. One said that they think that the policing situation has gone better and that they are writing less tickets and harassing people less. The other 3 did not find this to be true. They found that there are many instances where laws would be kind of used unevenly against them. A lot of times, like smoking, and how far away from the door you'd have to be. Sometimes these things weren't too clear, and they found that they'd be penalized a lot for that. So, yeah, it's kind of a murky picture, but not, yeah, it's hard to have a clear idea. But I would say that it seems like there is kind of like a growing hostility.
Again, impressed by the brevity of your answer to speak to homelessness policing in all of Canada. Well done. I'm going to slide in really quick a question to other Sarah, if other Sarah is here, just so that, you know, I think people were so blown away by your presentation that they couldn't automatically generate something, but that's why I'm here. That's why they asked me to be here. So I'm going to say, you know, you spoke a lot about how lived experience is often used to justify more hegemonic aims, and I totally agree with that. My question to you is, do you think some LXP voices are used toward that hegemonic duty more than others? And I mean, the obvious answer is working class voices, but I'm kind of prodding to see if you'll specify from there. Do you have an answer for that?
So yeah, the question is, are some voices used more than other to prop up essentially the status quo?
Yeah, particularly hegemonic research, and I'm thinking specifically of quantitative-based academic journals without getting too call out.
Okay, I mean, likely, and I'm not sure I'm completely following your track, because it seems like you have a very specific thing that I'm really quite interested in hearing about. So largely my experience is like within right now within like the political institutions and in who we're going to call around the table to provide input, and it really does. It's really tricky work in including lived experience voices, because it does seem to be that the most comfortable place for an institution are ones that are already kind of aligned with the status quo and are going to support the norms that are being presented there. And I think it's a real challenge when difference is brought up and those efforts are made to share those stories, but they're not able to be incorporated to any degree of change. So what have we really accomplished by making people share their stories and their perspectives if they aren't going to be valued in the same way? So I hope that kind of answers your question. I'm very curious to hear your specific take on this.
We can jam about that, don't worry.
Okay.
I'm going to throw it off to the finale for Bud Hull, who's going to give us some found poetry. I think Elaine wants to say something, but she is muted.
And I'm just really grateful that Bud has been willing to do this and is a trooper. Doing found poetry on the fly is not easy. And Sarah, I just want to quickly say what I'm hearing you talk about, and we've all had so many conversations about, is when lived experience is used as poverty porn, as the president of Amarillo College talks so much about. And that's one of the struggles we're having with all of this. But on that note, the wonderful Bud who saved my life, and the only reason I'm going to finish my PhD is because of Bud. And I tell him that all the time and he just ignores me. But okay, Bud, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Elaine. It's been fantastic. So what I'm doing here is I'm channeling Tina, Jes, Charity, Sarah, and Elaine, and so the piece I've got here it's called "We Are Not Alone: An Ode to Badassery, or Anger in the Brave Space." I feel the rage. I'm really mad today. In fact, I'm pissed off. Unsleepable benches, spikes, fins, I mean, fucking pig ears. Watching the clearances of our cities, all of our cities. We all have a right to common space. I'm really still angry at being made to feel invisible, at having our poverty class knowledge ignored, at doubts about, our own complicity. I really don't like living under the boot. How about sitting at a table of giants on rickety chairs? That's enough. But our stories really do matter. We are more than just the assistants. Our radical imaginations are alive. We can practice care in spite of hierarchies. We are so much more than talk. We are leading that change. Nothing about us without us. Long live the Shoestrings Initiative and working class academics. Class, class, class. Yes, say it again. We are representing class. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow, that is brilliant. There's nothing more powerful than found poetry, honest to goodness. That's come out of my research and that I'm doing, looking at poverty discrimination in Canadian universities and collaborating with a brilliant group of women. And this is one of our research partners. She sent this to me as she's trying to finish her education and hadn't had food in several days and was going to be joining for a focus group and couldn't pay her tuition fees. And I think it really captures why Canadians coming together and working in class is so important and what we're doing. And Bud mentioned, so here's a promotion for the next year's conference, but Bud mentioned the Shoestring Initiative. And this is something I founded at this university I'm at, based on my master's research at looking how growing up in poverty was shaping students' experiences, undergrad experiences as they were trying to compose a life in university, how students from generational poverty. And this has become quite the initiative, not really knowing where it would go, but also, I mean, huge roadblocks as a few of us are trying to do this. But what we've learned through this, and one of the critical things we've learned in the research, is how just important it is that we have community, that we can find our people where we're not freaks. I'm always grateful that I can talk to Bud just in my speak, and that he's not scared by what I talk about, and that's not the norm in academia. So when we come together in these collaborative ways, like the conference and like the Canadians coming together to do this, and like Sarah, who I haven't met yet, just coming in, the other Sarah to help, these moments change lives. And listening to presentations today, I was like manically trying to wrap up my dissertation and just writing from that place of honesty and lived experience. So I'm just so grateful to all the amazing people on this panel. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I want to make sure last thoughts go to our panel members. Where's my, oh, stop share. Oops, stop share. So last comments from panel members, please.
I would just like to say thank you to Elaine for putting this panel together and inviting me to be on it and putting up with my lack of traditional academia. But thank you also to the audience. This was...
Yep, thank you for not doing that.
This is really, really fantastic for me. And this experience has convinced me that I want to build on this and try to turn this into actual research at some point. So I will be bothering Elaine about this in September for sure.
Well, I can either put people on the spot or I can, sing. And either of those is going to be uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable. Okay.
I also just want to thank Elaine and for all the panelists for this opportunity to hear, and all the folks who participated in the chat as well. It's always a little nerve-wracking, but also ends up being, in the end, really powerful to share these stories and to come together to talk about these things that probably a lot of us haven't talked about openly for most of their lives. So really, I'm thankful for these opportunities and thankful for everyone's contribution.
Yeah, I'm also just gonna kind of echo what everyone said. Thank you so much, Elaine, for organizing all of this, and Sarah, who I know she's not here anymore. She did a really great job facilitating. Really enjoyed everybody's presentations, and it feels really good to be in such great company. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you for providing the flexibility and the space to just do something very different, and it feels good. So thanks for the positivity, and thank you.